Hi, everybody, and welcome to this Facebook Live. If this goes long enough, I will also post it as a podcast on Spotify, so that's a cool thing I can do now. I got an interesting discussion going on in the secret group, and y'all should join the Facebook secret group. It is the blue subscribe button. Lots of interesting discussions. Got to join with a real profile picture, though. Real people in there. No trolls. $4.99 a month. Anywho, so what is being discussed is emotional labor, and whether emotional labor is really the realm of the woman and the way that some women act like, or is it just the preoccupied attachment partner, or is it a partner with anxiety? And so it is interesting as a psychologist to think that if somebody came in doing a whole bunch of emotional labor and saying that it was really essential that they do all of it, then likely that would classify as anxiety, social anxiety, generalized anxiety. Somebody who thinks that they have all these things to do, it's super important, nobody else can do it as well as them, and that if they don't do it, like everything's gonna grind to a halt. That's anxiety, you know? I mean, saying that you do the emotional labor of reaching out to the family and that's something you like to do is one thing. However, if you say that if you didn't, then you would have no family ties. Nobody would ever reach out to you guys. If you missed the Christmas presents, then it would cause World War III. The whole thing makes you so anxious. You start thinking about it months in advance. That's called anxiety. And the way that we treat anxiety is exposure therapy and challenging thought. So both of those are part of CBT, right? So we would challenge the thought that if you don't do all this extra stuff that the world is going to end, or there's going to be some really negative outcome to you or the kids or the family. And then we would also do exposure therapy to not doing some of this emotional labor and then seeing what's really the travesty that happens, because most of the time it's nothing, and that's especially true when the women are like, well, if I don't reach out to my mother-in-law, then like she's never going to talk to us. What are you talking about? Like, she loves your son, her son, same as you love your children. So, of course she would reach back out to her son unless she's completely batshit, right? And then good riddance, if he wants to reach out, he can. But like sometimes there's just all these cognitive distortions where somebody with either anxiety, as I'm saying, low self-esteem, so that they situate their entire value in this stuff, or preoccupied attachment, and I'll talk about that in a sec, really situates their entire value in this emotional labor. Now, how does that work for preoccupied attachment? Well, the person's always trying to get more time with the spouse. So what better way to do that, right, than to schedule 7 billion things on the calendar so that they always have to hang out with the spouse? They're not doing it consciously. It's this subconscious, obsessive way to get the partner around the house, to say, well, we have this and we have this and you have to do this and then we have to do this and that and this and this and this. And so I guess there's no time for you to do anything else. But in reality, that person is just very, very anxious about rejection and being alone, and the other partner is avoidant and they're just trying to keep them around, and also continually say, look how valuable I am, look how valuable, don't leave me, because I'm so valuable. So you really have to interrogate, if you are really into this idea of emotional labor, what's going to happen if you don't do some of it? In healthier relationships, the other person just does it, and you don't know that until, of course, you test it. You test, for example, not doing everybody's laundry every day, or like not making individual meals for all of your kids, and then you see that they just eat what's around, etc., etc. So that's testing out these assumptions and finding them out to be wrong. Now, there is, of course, the dynamic that I'm doing a seminar on, and I'll link to that, on the anxious wife and the ADHD husband. And in this case, emotional labor is just one of the things that she says that she does all of, and he doesn't do any of it. But in reality, he's struggling with bad ADHD and she's struggling with bad anxiety. So nobody is acting well here. She's doing more than she has to do, and he's doing less than he has to do. And since both of them want to blame the other person, he says that she acts all crazy and micromanagey, and she says that he's like completely useless and passive and does nothing. And then they end up yelling at each other instead of understanding that each of them was drawn to this dynamic because of what's in the other person, their own upbringing. Both of them usually saw a dynamic like that. So that's coming up on March 7th. That seminar, it's going to be at 12 p.m. on a Friday. So hopefully you and or your spouse can attend, either an individual or a couple. And that's what I'm going to be talking about then. And these couples, by the way, where emotional labor is a big issue, they do really well in couples counseling, because unless they get an emotional labor, obsessive aficionado that situates everything in the sociology of emotional labor, then you don't go deeper at all. Then you just sit there doing that fair play stuff with the chore charts, and then you leave therapy, and then you come back in 2 more years when you're on the precipice of divorce to actually look at the underlying issues, with family of origin, going deeper and figuring out what's actually going on. Or maybe some people do well after the chore chart, but I definitely see people come back in after the chore chart when it doesn't work. So from my perspective, go deeper than the chore chart originally. You can end with the chore chart once everybody understands why they're acting how they're acting, right? Which is not just some sort of sociological explanation. It's also a psychological explanation. Because, by the way, there's plenty of women who do absolutely nothing, not really nothing, but nothing as much as men do nothing, that sit around and the other partner does everything and works, and, they go on their phone and they say, here I am shopping for the children, and that's what I do. And this happens when women are depressed, anxious, have PTSD, etc., and the man is codependent. So I've seen the gender inverse of this too. Candace says, in love with your eye makeup, beautiful colors on you. Thank you, Candace. I always appreciate a positive comment especially because I get so many nasty comments on the internet. But anywho, the point being, if you think that emotional labor is like the entire reason that your marriage isn't working, or that it's some male-female thing, I'm here to tell you that there's plenty of men that do all the emotional labor too. By the way, when you get divorced, if you get divorced because you don't actually know what's going on in your marriage and you say it's about emotional labor only, then, by the way, your partner's going to be able to maintain the children being alive during his time too. And they may actually like going there a lot more because there's like less rules and less restrictions. So that you don't get to that place, the person who's struggling with doing all the emotional labor should work on their anxiety and recognize it as such. And the other person should work on their underfunctioning. So one is an overfunctioner, one is an underfunctioner. But remember, nobody's just a functioner, just good, I'm so functional. One is too much and one is too little. So this is a codependent dynamic, because nobody has to do Christmas cards, right? Nobody has to host the family. These are all extras. If this extra is destroying your mental health, then you can opt out. But what you can't do is really tell the other person that they must do all the things you think of as super important that might be diagnosed as anxiety if you went to therapy. And it might be interrogated, why do you think that you have to do all of these things all the time? And if you're watching this, please do send a like or a love, or if you're watching this on Spotify later, please do rate me 5 stars for my podcast. And now I will take any questions that y'all have about emotional labor, about couples, about ADHD versus anxiety, that dynamic, which I'm doing the seminar on, attachment, anything. So if any of y'all have any questions after you like and love this, please type them in the comments. Another aspect of this, by the way, is that this dynamic usually works until there's children. So she likes doing all the emotional labor before that. It's kind of like this homemaking vibe, like when you're young, you fall in love, and then it's so constant that the woman comes in and she makes the house look nice, and it's a woman's touch and all this stuff, and she likes doing it a lot. Then she gets overwhelmed with kids, with postpartum, which could be depression or anxiety, and all of a sudden she's changing the frame from I love to do all this stuff to aren't you going to split down the middle all the stuff that I think needs to be done? And he's like, what is going on? None of this is about keeping the baby alive. Seems pretty anxious, this seems pretty obsessive, but he can't say anything because then she gives him 15 million articles about emotional labor, and he doesn't have the time to read all those, so he shuts his mouth, and of course that's codependent on both sides, And by the way, the people that lean into the emotional labor thing are also tend to be people that don't look in at themselves. Because if you situate yourself in a sociological phenomenon that prevents you from looking in detail at the psychological phenomenon that's going on in your unique situation. So I have so many posts about accountability without ever using that buzzword, where I say you got to examine your own contribution to any dynamic, right? And one big dynamic is an overfunctioner, underfunctioner. So you have to think, why am I overfunctioning? Why do I think that all of these things have to be done? What does it say about my core self-esteem? Do I believe that my utility is only doing these things? What do I think will happen if these things don't change? If they don't happen, if they don't manifest, that everything looks perfect, or that the children have this or that or extra stuff. Kelsey says, I did give up the extras years ago, and it's kind of worse because now nothing gets done and exacerbates anxiety. Any other tips? Well, then they weren't extras, right? So what do you mean? So if you gave up the extras and you're still mourning the loss of the extras, then I don't know your individual situation, right? You would want to go to couples counseling and see what's going on, so there could be a reality check. Couples counseling is often very useful just because the person gets to talk to both of you and they come out more objective. In my individual sessions, by the way, frequently I'll ask a spouse to come just so that I can level set. Like this person saying X, Y, and Z, frequently the spouse comes in and is like, actually, from my perspective, it's actually A, B, and C. And then, of course, that provides a massive change of frame. So it would be interesting, Kelsey, what your husband thinks is going on. Why does nothing get done now versus having more time to do the core things instead of the extra, now that the extras are off the plate, etc. Is somebody dealing with anxiety, ADHD? How is the home being managed? It's like I would need to know so much more stuff to give you any really valuable advice. But my main piece of valuable advice is to think, well, that doesn't make sense, right? If you gave up the extras, then there should be more time to do the core things. So what happened? You know, did your husband's functioning go down even more? Is there drinking? Is there depression? I mean, what is happening? On your end, did anxiety mount? Are there more children now? Is somebody now working full time? I mean, there's like a million variables. And by the way, for anybody listening, you always have to think about all the possible variables instead of just the ones that are easy to think. So frequently a partner will say, she's crazy or he's lazy, right? And what does that even mean? That's just a shortcut. You know, there's no utility in those kind of shortcuts. All they do is kind of pit the partners against each other. But if you look at it kind of like a flow chart, like, okay, well, first one child came and then we were struggling with too much. Then when we added in the second child, then things really, took a turn. At that point, I was also struggling with my mental health, and then his job ramped up. And at that point, there was a crisis point in our marriage. So almost like a narration. And this is what couples counseling can do. It can give you this really objective story of what happened so that the partners do not blame one another and instead can look at it like a novel. Like, when did things start to go bad? What are the inflection points here? Steve said, I'm convinced that neither party in most relationships has a clear understanding of the tasks the other does and how much time they actually take to complete. Too much generalization. I believe you, Steve. That is accurate. You could see it change somewhat when partners work in the same business. So for example, like, my husband and I work and both do Best Life stuff for my group practice, and we have a real estate business, etc. And so then you're actually like dividing up tasks. And when you do that, then you can really see what each person does. But since you don't do that about the home, although closer people honestly do, people that like to talk and narrate more of what they do, especially now that people text, a lot of young people know exactly kind of what each other does all the time. The young couples that I see, I'm doing this, oh, take a picture of this, take a picture of that. I think that stuff helps. Kind of getting a window into your partner's day really, really does help. And a lot of guys think that their job is too boring to talk about, and so they never tell their wife any wins, any losses, anything really at all. So she has no idea what he does. It's like a black box. It's like when little kids play house and then they take the dad one and they say, he's at work. They throw him to the side. They don't know what the hell he does, right? So if that's how your wife thinks about your job, then it's really no wonder that she may not feel close to you. Because if that's what you do most of the day, I'm not talking to you anymore, Steve, just in general, and she doesn't know about it, then you're leaving money on the table there in ways that she can understand you. Because it's a lot different when a guy comes home and says, I'm tired, I want to lay down, and you know that he had a tremendous conflict with his boss and he's worried, versus if he just says that and he doesn't tell you anything that happened at work, right? Because then you're like, man, what the hell? Like, why don't I get to do that? So more communication, Steve, is essential to developing empathy, and empathy is key in a healthy relationship. Perspective taking, the ability to visualize what the other person does. Kelsey says, you're right, we have 6 kids. He has ADHD and more. My anxiety has worsened. At the end of the day, these are excuses if there's no change and we have to function. Well, Kelsey, neither of those are excuses. Those are 2 difficult disorders. So the first thing to do would be to get both people into treatment. Frequently, both ADHD and anxiety are responsive to therapy and medication. Anxiety is super responsive to therapy, CBT, exposure therapy, etc. And ADHD usually is pretty responsive to meds, but there are ADHD coaches as well. And a skilled couples therapist can also help you guys negotiate this. You should sign up for my thing, Kelsey, if you're not already signed up. I'm going to link it. It's the Anxious Wife and ADHD Husband seminar. And the reason that I'm having literally a seminar on it is because it's a super common dynamic. And understanding one another is very useful. You should also read the book, The ADHD Effect on Marriage, Kelsey. And neither of you is understanding the other. And whatever you, there's so much resentment also that, again, I just quote this meme all the time in every live, but it's like there's that bitch eating crackers like she owns the place, which is just so funny because as soon as you're mad and resentful at somebody, anything that they do looks like just an amplification of what a bad person they are. And so that this person in the meme, they're just eating crackers. But because you don't like them, you think that they're eating crackers with an attitude. So usually, Kelsey, in a couple that is struggling with resentment and bitterness and all these different, these histories of grievances and empathic ruptures, then you're looking at him through very dark lens, that amplifies everything he does wrong. You don't see what he does right, and he's seeing you the same way. He or she is coming to be up my ass about something else, even when you just walk into the room. So again, couples therapy, you could start my seminar. Sound honestly perfect for it. I don't know if you have time. You got 6 kids. It's on a Friday. I don't know, if you homeschool or something. that would be a lot. Steve says, I agree 100%. It's a critical element. Any concern is appropriate to discuss. Actual data is the answer. Generalizations are a big enemy. Yeah. But Steve, you also don't want to go down the rabbit hole of excessive data, like the guy who makes a spreadsheet about how much his wife has sex with him. We do not want to go into that rabbit hole. Generally, we don't have to, thankfully, with couples therapy. Once empathy is created and a deep, genuine understanding, not just of how the person functions now, but how they got to be how they are. Family of origin stuff is so key. If you are doing couples therapy and not going into family of origin, there's no point, in my perspective, doing this for 15 years. And so for example, you and your wife could figure out with a tally how often you have sex versus how often each of you does each chore. But I'll tell you, that usually doesn't end that well. And what does end better is for you guys to be talking about why you feel bad, why you feel disrespected, why you feel unloved, not because of the partner, but originally what predated the partner. When else did you feel this way? How did you originally get into this dynamic? Why does it feel familiar, etc.? So great. These are great questions. Does anybody have any other questions? 10 people watching. Please send your likes and your loves and your Spotify 5-star reviews. Kelsey says, thank you. We are reading the Autistic Husband book you recommend. What Autistic Husband book? Oh, the Journal of Best Practices? That's the only one I recommend. That is a good book. We'll try that book too and look into your seminar. Thank you. ADHD treatment has not worked enough. Anxiety is complicated to treat for me, but I will look into CBT again. All right. Sounds like you want to do the work, so that's great. I will link the seminar after this. When people both show up and it's the two of them against the problem, here the problem is the ADHD, anxious dynamic, then it goes a lot better versus me against you. And so whenever you could see it as the two of you against the issue, then it's a million times better. Like the two of us against a sex life that isn't working, right? Versus like, I want more sex than she does, that isn't good, right? So when there's one blaming the other in any facet of the relationship, that is, that leads to frustration, resentment, bitterness, animosity, and possibly divorce, versus if it's two people against the problem. And that is a much better, and that's for parenting too, like you and your kid against the problem of them misbehaving versus you against your kid. You can use this lens in myriad ways that are more effective and depersonalize the problem and get rid of the victim perpetrator lens, etc. All right, I got like a couple more minutes, 13 people watching. That's awesome. Send your likes, guys. And I have time for one more question. If anybody has a question, I hope y'all are going to join my Facebook secret group. It's great discussions in there. That's where I got this original emotional labor topic from. I hope y'all are following me on Spotify, my podcast, Substack, and Medium, where I repost all my writing. Some of it is from so long ago. It's so funny to see it again. Like I just had something on Substack about the time when I had like all these kids, 3 kids under 3.5, and how crazy that was. But I hope that y'all are following me in all these different platforms. Does anybody have one more question? I will wait to listen. And remember, guys, by the way, now that I have you, we just hired another coach and therapist, Paula Pate. She is great, not just because she does her progress notes right away, which is awesome, but because she is also very skilled working with individuals, couples, and sex issues. She does coaching and she does therapy. So reach out. She also has experience parenting adult children. It's, in my perspective, I've never seen a therapist younger than myself. Some people like to do that, but some people like somebody who is their same age or older. That's always what I pick. Historically, when I was younger, I always liked these older people because I was like, man, at least they lived, already. And got to have learned something, right? But I say that because frequently the issues with parenting adult children are different than those of parenting young kids, obviously, definitionally. So she has experience with that. She also works with estrangement, which is something that I get a lot of requests from ever since I was interviewed by the American Psychological Association. They said my name for an article about estrangement, and man, did I get referrals from that. Unexpected. You do these interviews, usually nothing comes of it. But anyway, so now I have somebody who specifically works with that. She also does this David Schnark's Passionate Marriage, The Crucible. That's the framework, and that incorporates sexual intimacy issues against a larger backdrop of relational issues. So I'm also going to link to Paula in my description here or in my comments based on where and when you see this. All right, guys, I think I am going to head out. Thank y'all so much for listening. This was fun, and I will talk to you guys soon. Oh, one last thing. If you ever need a therapist or a coach, there's not only Paula, there's 10 of us. I even have some openings rarely. Oh, I got a question. I even have some openings myself, so you can always write into me. Steve said, thanks for my work. Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Erin says, what about a guy who says he wants more sex but makes zero effort to create those experiences? For example, asleep daily before kids are even in bed. Their bedtime is 9 p.m., leaving no alone time to be had. Well, sounds depressed to me, honestly. I certainly don't know him. Can't diagnose him. But if a man's when does he wake up, though? Does he wake up like 4 a.m.? So if he's waking up at the same time as you, but he's got to be asleep before 9 p.m. and he's getting like 10 hours of sleep, that's not usually a good sign for somebody's mental health. So that would be the first thing I'd look into. Low testosterone. He says he wants more sex, but he won't stay awake to have it. Then he may only be saying he wants more sex. His drive may be down. Frequently that goes along with low T, depression, and so forth. I would just always recommend, I have posts about this, when your husband doesn't want sex. You're telling me he does, but actions speak louder than words. If he really did, I think he would he'd be up if he could. So if he can't, then why, right? Why is he so fatigued? But good question. And I'll talk to everybody soon. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.